Good morning, and welcome to this week's episode of the Wednesday Wisdom Podcast, or Sports Curious Podcast, Wednesday Wisdom Edition. This week, we're talking about something that was really interesting. I sort of just started getting these thoughts of seeing what's happening in the world of NFL broadcasting. We're seeing these big contracts with Tom Brady. We're seeing the Today Show did a piece on the NFL broadcasting sort of university they do. And then we're also learning a lot about Tom Brady as an owner and what that's done for his broadcasting career. And so we really got to thinking about what does the life of an NFL broadcaster look like? And here to help me talk about that today is our resident expert of all things sports, my co-founder, my favorite brother, Scott. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on again. We're here to break down kind of the life of an NFL broadcaster and even discuss the transition from football player to broadcaster that we've seen so many of these guys make, and even discuss the huge salaries they're getting for broadcasting as compared to what they made in the NFL.
Now, I may be wrong on this, but the first person I can really remember being in the booth that was a player was John Madden. I'm sure there was someone before him, but was he sort of the pinnacle of that sort of peak of broadcasting perfection, if you will, coming off the field? I guess he wasn't a player, he was a coach.
I think John Madden kind of defined and revolutionized what it was to be an NFL broadcaster, announcer, the way he described the game, the way his enthusiasm for the game. He was 100% football guy through and through. He had the telestrator, he made the noises, and he kind of, as you can see, to this day, he's got the video game, and he's just synonymous with football. So he was, the GOAT at that point, yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I just remember when working in baseball and some of our players would go into the broadcast booth, I really appreciated their perspective on the play. And like that play was really actually a hard play. It looks easy on TV, but that whole perspective of what we see on the field from the stands, and especially for someone like me who's never really played football and has no shot in the world to be good at it, I don't always have a perspective. So I think I appreciate their perspective on what the game is like.
And that's absolutely correct. And especially with football, sitting in the stands, you don't know what play was actually called. You don't know if the interception the quarterback threw was because the receiver ran the completely wrong route and he threw the ball where it was supposed to be and the receiver was not there. So having a guy like a Tom Brady or a Tony Romo or Troy Aikman in the booth who has perspective as a quarterback could sit there and say, he probably ran that wrong route and that's not on the quarterback. So it's an interesting perspective to have. And I think some guys can play football, but can't tell anyone else how to play football or put into words how they did it. So it's really a special skill to be able to translate it to wording that normal people can understand.
Right. Well, it's kind of like anything, right? I always say we've had Nobel Peace Prize winners come in and Nobel Prize winners for different things, science, et cetera, come in and talk to students. And the people who are really, really smart understand the overall concept and then can break it down to a second grade level. And these guys get that, right? They're not just calling plays. They're not just living in football. They get the overall and the overarching perspective of what's happening. And they can break that down because they're smart enough about the game that they can break it down and bring it in the booth. And like you said, not everybody can do that, especially for like an analyst is one thing, but being in the booth and having to be up there and kill dead time, or you have a game that all of a sudden is a blowout and you're having to fill in the blanks and you're pulling things out of stories and things that you never maybe thought you'd talk about, but you're having to fill this dead time.
That's always the interesting thing to watch when there's a 30-point blowout at halftime. And what stories do we get? Where do they go in between plays? Like, how do they keep people interested nowadays? Because we have so many options what to watch. Our attention spans are not long. So how do they keep us engaged? It's always fun. And I don't think you understand the perspective to make your point, clarify what you're saying, and make sure it translates to normal people within the span of a dead time in a play is also a challenge. You might have 10 to 20 seconds just to get your point across and make sure it makes sense and that people understand it. That's obviously the challenge too.
Now, one thing I didn't quite, I guess I never really thought about, but the week of a game, obviously they're doing a lot of research, right? And it's the simple things of how to pronounce players' names. When Tua Tagovailoa came into the league, I'm sure you had to practice that 10,000 times. But so there's that part of, people don't think about, you have to learn how to pronounce names, that kind of stuff. But they're going to practices. What else are they doing? What does a week look like leading up to a game for these ladies and gents?
And a lot of this comes from their playing career, how they approach the week of a game. I mean, very regimented. Most of them, I would hope they're regimented in what they do. They probably have each day leading up to the weekend of kind of what they're doing. Maybe they're calling a simulated game. They're watching old game tapes to kind of understand the concepts that these teams are using during the game. And then kind of come to the weekend, Friday or Saturday, they will fly out to the actual game site. They'll go to practice. They'll meet with teams. They'll, kind of get an idea of what the teams plan to do that Sunday. So they have some insight on what they're going to be calling. So it's kind of basically just like being a player as far as preparation goes and the amount of effort it takes to be successful. When you have a split second play, you need to know the guy's name and what he's supposed to be doing. That can obviously help when you have some insight.
Yeah. And it's really interesting when you have, I mean, there's so many things, right? In the beginning of the week, they probably have a team meeting where they sit down and go, well, you know what? The really interesting story on this is actually so-and-so and their charity work or whatever that might be. And they're having to, we do that with the podcast where we say, okay, we have some stuff that's obviously always set, right? The start of college basketball season, we need to talk about college basketball. But other times we don't. And we're thinking, what's the hot topic? What are we going to speak about? And they're doing the same thing, obviously on a bigger level, but it's in for a bigger audience, I should say. But it's fascinating to think about how they piece all that together. And that really came out because Tom Brady is now an owner of the Raiders, a minority owner of the Las Vegas Raiders, but an owner nonetheless. And so he's really lost access to a lot of these things that the other broadcasters have.
Yes, he has. And he signed his deal with Fox long before he was approved as an owner. So I don't know that he really anticipated this coming about. But like I mentioned, these announcers and play callers, they get access to both teams, to the facilities, to practice, just to get some insight that the public doesn't, to be able to call these games. And as an owner of the Raiders, teams don't want him at their practice in their facilities, seeing what they're doing so that he could go back and report to the team or talk to Mark Davis or talk to, the defensive coordinator. Well, these teams are doing this leading up to the game. So he's lost complete access to kind of what gives these people the greatness that they have to call these games that he just doesn't have access to anymore, which makes things a lot more challenging for him, especially as being a brand new commentator as the number one person at Fox. Yeah.
I mean, all eyes are on him. And I watched the first couple of games of his, and he did get better. He got more comfortable in the booth. What do you see out there about him?
Admittedly, I watch Red Zone on audio, and then I have a normal game on mute usually. So I'm usually listening to Scott Hansen, who's probably one of the most incredible announcers we have, calling 7 hours nonstop football with no commercials, doing highlights. So I'll put that up there on the record. We listened to the first game he did, which was, I think, Dallas and Cleveland. Obviously, there's going to be some growing pains. How do you work with your partner? When do you jump in? How in depth can you go with a play? I do know that he took a season off in 2023, and he and his partner just called simulated games for a year.
Oh, wow.
To try to get the flow and kind of understand how they're going to work together. So it's not for lack of effort.
Yeah.
It just takes time. It's
interesting.
Nobody's going to be great the first few games they do. So, and he spent his career in New England not saying anything usually to the media or public. So for him to get out of that mindset and be able to, go into detail quickly and have people understand it is a challenge, but he'll get there. And I know he's calling the Super Bowl this year. So
oh, wow. Okay.
He'll get there, and he knows that.
Yeah. And it takes practice. I didn't love Tony Romo when he first started either. And I still sometimes don't like Troy Aikman, but he's too opinionated in my opinion, he's too opinionated. But you watch them improve. And I do love listening to Tony Romo now because he's really good he gets really excited, which I think is kind of fun.
Maybe too excited sometimes.
Sometimes too excited. It happens. But I think it's cool because I love their perspective of, if you would have called this, it could have gone like this, or this is what that is. Kind of like we talked about in the beginning. That wasn't the quarterback's fault. That's just, he was doing his job. And whatever that might be, it's a really interesting perspective. And I look at a quarterback like a catcher in baseball. They have to know everything that's happening on the field. So they are really great at being in the broadcast booth. But then you have guys and like Greg Olson, who was one of the 3 people who started tight end in university. I think Greg Olson is phenomenal. And Greg Olson, he was pushed down to second tier when Tom Brady came along. They bumped Greg Olson out of the number 1 spot down to his second tier spot. Tom Brady came in for $375 million for 10 years. And then there's Greg Olson, who was making $10 million a year, but took a $7 million paycheck cut because they bumped him down because of Tom Brady. And so not a quarterback, but also has a great perspective on the game. I think has a really he comes across very genuine on TV too, which I think I appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, he's handled it with grace, right? Getting basically demoted to number 2 when, he's already called the Super Bowl. He called Eagles Chiefs Super Bowl. And I think, like you said, he did an incredible job. He's got great perspective, understands how to relay that message football-wise to the common fan. I mean, he had 14 years in the NFL, so he's got all the experience in the world. And I think he's done a great job. And to take a $7 million pay cut, to have, well, obviously, Tom's Tom, but a $7 million pay cut is quite large.
Yeah. I mean, he lost what? I mean, he's made $70 million in his 14-year career at 7-0.
Yeah.
But still, that's a big pay cut. And to be demoted to the not so popular games. And there's just a piece of that, like you said, he's handled it so well. They had such great team chemistry too. He and the team on Fox. And so that whole thing has to come back together for Tom Brady.
Yeah. And I mean, Greg had quite a few years of experience going into it. And he's worked hard, and Tom's notorious for his work ethic. So he'll get there, I assume. It'll take time.
Yeah. I had no idea he took a whole year off and had been like essentially practicing.
Yeah. I think it was from when he retired in 2022, I believe. And then he just started this year. So he had a year off to prepare, and he put in work.
Drink his TB12 shakes.
Yeah. And modeling his underwear and whatever else he was doing.
Hey, I used TB12 protein, so I can't say anything.
I mean, he looks phenomenal, so I can't.
If only I had the same glowing skin and physique. It's just not doing that for me, but it's okay.
Give it a few more years. He's got a few years on you, so keep going.
Yeah, well, I think you got to get a little bit of work done too, but it's okay.
That's true. Yeah,
that's all right. Now we go from Greg Olson. We already kind of talked a little bit about Tony Romo. He is over on CBS. And he had I remember when he kind of held out for a big contract, and he got an unprecedented 10-year, $180 million deal in 2017. And he was undrafted. He made $127 million in his career. But do you remember when he kind of had that holdout and everyone was like, oh my gosh, he's asking for a 10-year contract? And how much money? And he got it. And now they're like, oh, Tom Brady's like, here, hold my beer. Let me go make $375 million instead of your 180.
And at the time it was silly, right?
Right, I remember that.
He was requesting, and that would well eclipse his career earnings, the deal he signed in 2017. But now he's at a bargain. I mean, obviously he saw where broadcast rights were going and the amount of money NFL's bringing in, so he held out, knowing that he had all the power in the world.
Yeah,
it's a good position to be in with leverage. And he's called Super Bowls, and there was some criticism maybe a few years ago that perhaps he had stopped doing all the preparation that he should have, and he perhaps may have been golfing too much because he's an incredible golfer. But I think that's kind of turned around.
Well, when you make $187 million, you do that.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't get that good at golf by preparing 24/7.
Yeah, either way, right? You can't be good at both. That good at both. One I want to talk about, because I'm not sure that people have put this together. So Kirk Herbstreit, who was an Ohio State quarterback way back when, a main fixture on ESPN College Game Day. He came over, was it last year or 2 years ago, to Thursday Night Football with Al Michaels.
Yeah, I believe Amazon started last year, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was last year. And so he does Thursday Night Football. He does ESPN College Game Day Saturday morning, and then he calls a game sometime on Saturday in college football. So this man is not only doing what everybody else is doing, but for a whole nother game. and ESPN College Game Day, which is what, 4 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours long. And so he's having to prepare all that content. The just amount of headspace that has to go into there and the amount of information he is just probably brain dumping every single day, right? Like I've got to shake off the NFL game and I've got to hop on a jet, make it to my ESPN College Game Day set, study for that, then study for the game. And it's pretty incredible what he's been able to pull off. And I think he does a really good job at it.
I mean, it's like we said, these guys in the NFL are preparing for one game. Kirk's all week, he's got to prepare for Thursday night, College Game Day, and then college. So the amount of information, the amount of players he has to understand, the rules even. I mean, NFL and college have different rules, so you have to be able to switch that, like, in your brain.
Yeah.
And I mean, Thursday night, late Thursday, fly to College Game Day. Then he usually flies to a different location on Saturday after game day to call a game. So he's in 3 different locations within 3 days, calling 2 completely different games with different partners. Al Michaels is obviously much different than Chris Fowler. So it's really, I don't think we can comprehend how incredible he really is at his job.
No. And it was last year, I think his son was in high school and playing, it was a senior year of high school playing football. I think he was a quarterback. I could be wrong. But he would go Thursday night, NFL, whenever he got there, we'll call it Tuesday through Thursday, NFL, hop on a plane, fly home so he could watch his son play football on Friday, fly after that game to College Game Day Saturday morning, fly out from College Game Day to wherever his game is on Saturday, and then fly home after the game Saturday night. I mean, I know he flies a private jet because the networks take care of him, but it's still a whole hell of a lot of things. You don't know where you're waking up every day. Like you need a poster board that when you wake up in the morning, you're like, Cleveland. Okay, Cleveland. We're in Cleveland.
Yeah, I'm exhausted just thinking about that travel. And most of these college game days are in college cities that aren't easy to get to either.
Oh, that's where you have a jet. I mean, you have to. How else would you do it? From
Cincinnati to Tuscaloosa to Austin, Texas in 3 days. And he's the guy that, he played quarterback at Ohio State but didn't make it to the NFL. So he's getting well compensated now. Yeah. And he's roughly like $10 million a year at Amazon and $4 million with ESPN. So, he's making up for lost wages, but he's definitely working for it.
Now we have to talk about, he had Ben, his emotional support dog, who was a retriever, a golden retriever, who would go with him everywhere, on the set, everywhere, and was sort of his emotional support dog. And Ben just passed away from cancer. And it's super sad because it was so fun to watch Ben go on travel with Kirk in hotel rooms and on planes and sitting next to his legs on the College Game Day set.
Yeah, I think Ben actually increased Kirk's popularity, honestly.
Probably. I mean, dog lovers now.
In the booth with him calling games, and then he's on the field, and you saw the tributes from everyone in the football world, even all the mascots giving Ben his love. You see him with all the live mascots with Uga and Bevo and all these different things. It's really sad. He had to go call a game that night. So he had to call Bengals Ravens day of that Ben passed away. So that right there is even more impressive than all the travel. So
that's a lot.
It's very sad.
Yeah, it's very sad. Now, one may wonder how these people go from on the field to the broadcast booth, and they didn't go to school for journalism. Chances are, I mean, yes, Aaron Andrews did, but they didn't. NFL started a couple years ago this NFL broadcasting boot camp where they take the players and these players apply essentially, and they basically put them through the ringer on what it takes to have a successful future in the broadcast booth. And they run them through, the Today Show actually just did a piece on it, which was really interesting. 110 people applied, 24 of them got into this 3-day seminar, and they learned how to be game analysts, TV and radio, studio shows, which are the ones that they cut back to before, at halftime and before, where they talk about what's happening in the game, podcast, talk radio, and they really teach them how to do their job.
Yeah, and they're trying to set these players up for success after football. So there's so many stories of players, once they're done, what do? They get lost in, the real world without structure. So while they're they're playing or either just retired. They have this boot camp, which is essentially like a military boot camp that they're going through. I think it's 3 days in the
Mm-hmm.
off season. This year there was 110 people applied, only 24 guys got accepted. So it's extremely competitive to get into, and you know that you're going through the ringer, doing everything you can to learn how to do in, like you said, like I don't think people understand like the in studio shows how tough that is, where you get 10 to 20 seconds to summarize the game or summarize a play, and you have to be in and out and get names right and, you know, say your opinion while, you know, listening to a producer in your ear. I don't know. Have you ever noticed that, you know, they have the earpieces and they have
It's
producers
really
talking to
hard. I've
them
done that before
while they're
doing the
talking?
news. It's awful.
Yeah. How do you tune that person out while it's just trying to say what you said? So,
But also hearing the person that's saying you have 10 more
yes.
seconds, counting it down your ear, and you're thinking,
Hmm.
so and so had 50 yards, and you're like, no, was that 5 yards? Wait, 4? What was going on? And it's that learning process of, and they're also not getting to prep because
Hmm.
you can prep for to call a game, but they're watching and they're going to talk about what just happened. So they obviously might have a couple minutes, but they're not getting
Hmm.
2 weeks to prep for it. They can't prepare what happened in the game. Someone gets injured or whatever that might be too.
Yeah. And it's coming from being a player to doing that is not an easy thing. You can't just wake up and do that one day.
Yep.
I mean, guys like Dan Patrick have been doing it for 30, 40 years and they're the best. And that's why they are the best. So
Yep.
it's a very cool opportunity for a lot of these players. We had quite a few Saints players this year, actually, who are active. Cam Jordan, Tyrann Mathieu were selected and they're still active. So a lot of them are, you know, getting their opportunities to do this. And a lot of these guys also have podcasts, which helps them talk.
Mm-hmm. You
They're
do get
getting the
better at it.
reps in.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing some insights into the world of an NFL broadcaster. It's something we'll be tuning into, and we'll obviously be all listening to Tom Brady and critiquing, as you do, for $375 million over 10 years. So thanks for sharing your wisdom on this one.
Thank you. And while you're watching games, kind of pay attention to how quickly they have to get into their points and get out. And it's kind of interesting to think, how would you do in that situation? Could you say that in a 10 to 20-second span?
Right. Well, there you have it. It's a talent,
Yeah.
multi-talented, multifaceted people. So thanks, Scott. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye.